Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Matthias Duwe. I'm head of the climate team at Ecologic Institute, which is a member of an EU-funded project called POLIMP that is hosting this webinar series. We are a project that's trying to collect and disseminate again information on climate policy issues pertaining to the international negotiations and EU climate policy. And we have a range of partners from around the EU that is joining us in this effort, which is led by Joint Implementation Network in the Netherlands. We want to make you aware at the very start, for those that are joining us live, of a few of the features, the means by which you can interact with us during this webinar before I get into the content. So here on the technical side, for those of you joining live, you should have the option on the right-hand side of your screen to ask us questions. So while I have a set prepared for the two experts that are joining us for the conversation today, you can also enter your own questions, and we have an important question on the technical side already from one of our viewers. So go ahead and make use of that. You can also interact. For those that are not asking your own questions, here is a sample screenshot of what it will look like when questions appear, and by clicking on the plus, as several of you I think have done for that very first technical question, you can vote up the question. So it seems that we have a knowledgeable audience already that know how to use Google Hangouts, but for those of you who are not familiar with this technology, I hope this is now relatively straightforward and well enough explained. I want to let you know that we have, as part of the POLIMP project, we have a variety of tools and publications. One of the exercises that we've recently started is engaging a set of experts from around the EU on energy and climate issues in a series of SNEP surveys. And the last one of those, the second one in the series, was conducted last week, and it was as its main topic, it had also the topic of our webinar, the EU ETS revision for 2030. And I wanted to make you aware of the results that should be published online today. And we will also be making reference to this survey as an input to the webinars. Now, also as one more piece of advertising of things that the project has to offer, I welcome you all to visit the POLIMP Knowledge Platform, which is available at climatepolicyinfohub.eu, which contains a wealth of information and articles on a range of topics related to the international negotiations and EU climate and policy issues, including several articles on the EU emissions trading system, which is indeed our topic of today. And I want to now welcome very much the two colleagues from the energy and climate community that are joining us today to discuss this topic with us. We have, I think, hailing right now today from Berlin, Anja Kollmuss, who is Climate Policy Coordinator at Climate Action Network Europe, usually based in Brussels. Climate Action Network Europe is an umbrella organization of NGOs working together on climate policy issues, and she's with the European headquarters. Anja, very welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And we have Andrei, who is chair of the Carbon Market Forum at CEPS, Center for European Policy Studies, also a partner in the POLIMP project. And Andrei has a long history of engagement, in particular with carbon market issues, including the EU ETS. We're privileged to have you with us today. Thank you, Andrei.
Thank you.
So the topic of today needs very little introduction, I think, to most of us joining the European emissions trading system. The first cap and trade system used for climate policy purposes in the world has seen a number of follow-ups spring up around the world, including in China, in Korea, in Kazakhstan, and in parts of the United States of America, with interest in several other countries as well. It's also, it's always been hailed as the flagship instrument at the EU level for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but that flagship has been going through some rough seas in recent years, with the prices for EU allowances dropping to significantly below 10 euros per ton, and a lot of debate going on over how to deal with these low prices and an allocation of surplus, accumulation of surplus of allowances in recent years. So the debate has been focused on that in recent years, but in October 2014, EU heads of state and governments decided on a key of elements for the future of EU climate policy for 2030, including new targets and a few key elements to be revised in including the EU emissions trading system. Now, in the middle of July, just before the summer, the European Commission published a proposal for a change in the emissions trading directive that's meant to be implementing the decisions taken by heads of state and government. So clearly, while it's been going through some difficult times, the EU ETS is still seen by European leaders as a key tool. As an opening question, I want to ask our two experts what they think of the importance of the EU emissions trading system. Despite the problems that it's had, do you still put a lot of hope into it helping achieve the 2030 climate targets in the EU? Anja, what's your take?
Well, let me say that it could be an important tool, and it will really all hinge on the political willingness to pass the necessary reforms that would turn it into an effective policy instrument. As you have mentioned, the EU ETS is currently failing to deliver on its objective to encourage investments in low-carbon technologies, and this is due to a number of factors, one of them being a weak reduction target, the massive use of international offsets, and a rigid policy design that didn't allow for adjustments once the economic crisis hits. So this, as we all know, has led to an enormous oversupply and to a significant drop in prices, which means that companies can delay or cancel investments in cleaner, more efficient production. And unfortunately, the proposed ETS reform proposal and the market stability reserve only partly address these issues. The target is too weak. Sorry?
Go ahead.
And the surplus still stays in the system. And so there's a couple of other things I want to mention, which is that even if the reforms were to be bold, they will only start 6 years from now. And the more time we lose, the less meaningful the ETS can be in helping the EU move away from fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. And even if reforms were bold and swift, I would add that we need other strong policies, such as for renewable energy and for energy efficiency. I think the ETS can at best be a supporting tool in achieving long-term decarbonization, but a price signal alone, even if it was considerably higher, is really not sufficient to facilitate the kind of transformational change we need to see.
Thank you very much, Anja, for that initial perspective on the importance of the ETS. I think there are a couple of terms there that we'll be able to follow up on as part of the conversation. But I want to put the same question to Andrei. What is your take on the role and the importance of the emissions trading system for the 2030 targets?
Well, thanks, Matthias. Look, it depends what you call what is the success of the ETS. The success ETS, the ETS is supposed to really help us reach in the most efficient way a goal of moving to a low carbon society and economy. It will do that. It will move us clearly to the 2020. We will reach the 2020 target. It will very likely move us to the 2030 target. The real question is how efficient that is, because the case can be made that given a number of things that are happening around the EU ETS, and this is due to overlap with other policies and a very large surplus, mostly generated by the economic crisis, we've got a very low price signal. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with a low price signal if it was for the right reasons. In this case, it is for the wrong reasons because the EU ETS lacks flexibility to adapt to market conditions. And as a result of that, you do have a price signal, but the price signal is really a short-term price signal. So we will do everything that it needs to do, but my suspicion is that by the time we reach 2030 or 2025, people are going to get into a state of panic because they haven't done things early on, and there's going to be a steep curve, and things are going to become to be very expensive. So you have a choice. I mean, you can let it run, and you can let it clean itself up the way it is right now, possible. The other option is that you acknowledge the fact that you need to deal with the market and to the market conditions, and the MSR has been part of that process. But if it does it too late, and it right now is not going to clean the surplus between 2024 2026, then really the price may kind of spiral out of control, and we will not have a low price, but all of a sudden we'll have a very high price. So it's a matter of how efficient and effective you want to be in the short term, in the long term.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I think, Anja, you also alluded to the fact that there are essentially different dimensions in terms of the timing that we're looking at. So the question was maybe too simplistic in a way. So we're, if I see it correctly, looking at the time dimension between now and when the revision kicks in. And then we're looking at the time towards 2013, the targets that have been set, and then the question is, what is the role for the long-term 2050 goals? What I would like to expand on then very briefly is actually the more immediate situation, since you brought that up, and it's diverting a little bit from my original game plan for the conversation, but we'll return in a second to the proposal, although it's linked to it. So a lot of the revisions that have been made are for the fourth trading period starting in 2021. Between now and 2021, you are concerned about the effectiveness. Do you have specific proposals of what should be added then to, or changed, or in addition to the proposal maybe, in the directive, so that this period, the remainder of the third trading period, could still be affected?
Do you want me to answer?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. So you're asking what would we like to see to happen before 2020 or before 2021?
Exactly.
Right? Well, ideally we have been advocating for a higher overall EU target, because we already know that the EU will significantly overshoot its 20% target. So we could easily go to a 30% target, and that's what we have been calling for. And we have been also been calling for the permanent cancellation of the surplus. Now, of course, we would love to see that. The political willingness to implement such bold revisions are very, very small. So I'm not quite sure what we will see, any other reforms than the one that was just passed, which is implementing the market stability reserve, which we of course very much welcome. We would have liked to see it implemented sooner, but we are glad it's gonna start functioning in 2019.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Then, since Andrei, would you like to come in on this question, or shall I?
No, I think that's an interesting question. I think that I think if we agree on something, is that either we have a problem or we don't have a problem. If we have a problem, then the medicine should have been applied quite fast, and in enough quantity to actually do something, rather than keep the patient on life support. This is what happened to the MSR. Good idea, but very timid. And frankly, it's a political compromise. We understand political compromise. We're a think tank, we're a policy think tank, so very aware, understand the realities. But also the reality is that in this case, it has provided some medicine, but is not going to do anything to anybody until 2019. I also do not believe that there is any stomach to reopen the MSR debate and the debate around the issues of the MSR. However, in the current package, in the current package, there are enough levers that can be played and that could have an impact. And those levers are levers that, yes, they may come in after 2020, but the market, look, we are in 2016. Anything that you want to pass is not going to pass for the next 2 years. So whether like it or not, I think anything that is put in legislation and passed by 2018 or so, then you will have an effect, an immediate effect, considering that people are hedging their power production 3 years in advance, considering that the industrial organizations that have to meet compliance are quite thoughtful, and I think they understand risk. So I think there are, realistically, kind of going back to the MSR debates, yes, I'd like to see it more correct. I don't think it's possible, but we have enough levers, and that's where I think the focus should be of the discussion now.
Well, thank you very much for that. I sense there a consensus on the fact that the window on change before 2020 is, at this point in time, largely closed, even though different stakeholders may wish to that the decisions had been taken slightly differently. But so that gives me the opportunity to look, in fact, at the fourth trading period. So the big additional lever, or rather very specific change that is going to come in, is the adjustment of the linear reduction factor that will bend the cap trajectory towards an ETS share of reducing the emissions from those sectors to 43% in 2030 compared to 2005. In combination with the changes that were recently adopted with the balancing mechanism for demand and supply and the market stability reserve that you already referred to, do you believe that these additional changes are going to be sufficient to deal with the accumulated surpluses? So is there additional medicine coming in through that additional change, to stay in the metaphor? Anja, can I have your perspective first, please?
So, unfortunately, I don't think it's sufficient, and I think we already alluded to that. I mean, Andrei pointed out to the fact that the market stability reserve will only remove the surplus by 2025, 2026. So that is a very slow process, and its surplus is instant. It might be, temporarily removed and put in the market stability reserve, but it is not permanently removed. So, and if you look at the EU's overall target, it is quite weak because it is a 40% target for 2030. If you translate that into an overall emissions budget, the way the EU is most likely to do it, you end up with an overall reduction target for the whole period of 25, 26, 27%. So that's not very ambitious. So looking at the ETS, a linear reduction factor of 2.2 and the 43% 2030 target is really not the most efficient and most cost-effective path. And the Commission shows that in their own impact assessment. And together with what Andrei mentioned before, this issue that if you kind of postpone action, you might end up in a situation where you have prices that are too low for too long a period, and then suddenly prices become very, very high, and then it might just not become politically feasible anymore to use the ETS. So that's one of the fears about the ETS not really getting its chance to become an efficient policy tool.
Mm. Thank you, Anja. That's very sobering analysis or take on the numbers. Andrei, do you have a similar reading, or are you less pessimistic?
Well, it's not a question of pessimism. It will be done. It shall be done. The matter is how efficient it's going to be done. If you look at the current package, I mean, look, this is the last bullets. There are no more bullets after this. Even though I'm in the policy for climate change, and this is great discussion, but I do not believe there is any appetite to continue to reopen yet a new structural reform post this particular one that's been put forward over the summer. So we better get it right now, or this is not going to happen. Now, if you draw the line, under this current, if you want, proposal, I think there are a number of things that one needs to ask. I think, and you will answer positive. If you answer positively to these questions, then you've got the EU ETS, which is the central pillar of climate change policy in the EU, and the change is market-driven. I mean, that's kind of the general idea. The EU seems to have made a decision it wants to be market-driven with the EU ETS as a central pillar. So is the EU ETS able to provide a 2030 long-term price signal? That's one question. Can you answer that positively? Can the EU ETS provide good market functioning? I think that's, to some degree is true. There are other elements that's not true. And does it provide effective and proportional protection against carbon leakage, which is also a very real element. And I question whether we can answer yes to this 4 questions. So the EU ETS will be here, will continue to exist. The central question is this the driving force behind transformation, or is it going to become a residual instrument, and transformation being driven by other policies such as renewable energies and so on, very laudable with its own objectives, but with a much higher price. Let's not kid ourselves. Let's be very, very clear about the price for that is going to be much higher, and we all know that. So that is the decision that people need to make. Do you want to make this, to continue to have this as a central element of your climate change policy, or do you accept the fact that it will be not the central, it will be one of many elements of climate change policy? The initial decision was for it to be. It seems to be drifting.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for making it clear that it does depend on your perspective on these matters, and that people may come to slightly different assessments. One of those questions, or a similar type of question that you were raising earlier, relates to what you just referenced as carbon leakage. You were saying, is there a problem or is there not? And among those actors that actually do not necessarily see low prices in the EU ETS as a problem, of course, a number of the regulated entities, especially those that voice concerns over the impact that it will have on their own competitive positions and their products. So largely this, among the sectors that are covered by the EU emissions trading system, this relates to the industrial sectors in Europe. And so one of the key items for debate going forward is likely to be the treatment of industrial installations under the system going forward. There are a number of changes included in that treatment in the proposal, at least compared to the way that the system would have gone forward without the revision. And I would like to get your take on these adjustments that the Commission has proposed, such as implementing the heads of state and government decisions on the continuation of free allocation, the changes to the carbon leakage rules. Do you think that the concerns voiced by industrial sectors over the future of the ETS, are they warranted or not? And I'd like to go first with Andrei, please.
Well, it's very difficult to tell, because the ETS has functioned outside the parameters. It's a machine, it's a regulatory machine, and it's been functioning outside the parameters and which was built to function. And as such, the fact that I think most studies said that there was going to be this enormous carbon leakage, I think we've observed very little. I think this is what the studies seem to indicate. Could be said that it happened because of the policies that were put in place, free allocation, or you could argue they were put because the price was low and we had an economic crisis. I mean, which one is it? And it's very, very difficult to link cause and effect. Going forward, the world is not the same. It's sometimes you learn from history. Sometimes the history is not a good representation of the past. And what we see in this package, I would argue that you have a rapidly, at some point, decreasing pie and the amount of free allocation. So if I were an industrial, I had 2 choices. One choice is that I would say the 57% rule, in which says that 57% should be auctioned. Can I break that rule so I can get as many free allocation as I needed? I'm not bound by that rule. The second piece that you can deal with, you can say, I cannot change that rule because that is EU Council conclusion, and there seems to be some very powerful member states behind that. Then what I need to do is I need to make sure inside the free allocation zone, I need to make sure that I have a very focused free allocation, and only those guys that need to get it, get as many as they want, as they need, not that they want, they all want everything, but as much as they need. But those that are really at much less risk get very little or much less. To me, the 30% that you have now for people that are not on the carbon leakage list, I find it a little bit difficult to justify intellectually. I think also, in my mind, the world is not binary. I don't think you can be at risk or not at risk of carbon leakage. I think there are shades of risk, and that's what risk is. And if we look at California, if you look at other systems, they have a graduated system where they have high, low, medium, and no carbon risk. So I think these are certain things that ought to be or be examined if we want to focus more and actually give it to those that need it, and give a little bit less or not at all to those that don't need it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So you were advocating for a more tailored approach to the rules. Anja, what is your take on the treatment of the industrial sectors in the Commission proposal?
Yeah, I want to make a few more general comments on this, which is, first of all, that this topic on carbon leakage is certainly the one that will make most noise in this debate for reform, but it's not actually the one that impacts the target itself. And in our opinion, the fact that the target is so weak and that the surplus remains unaddressed is actually the more important reform area. But nevertheless, of course, it's important to discuss free allocation to industry. Europe has long advocated for full auctioning of all allowances in order to ensure the polluters pay principle. We find the Commission's proposal rather weak, both in terms of stopping subsidizing industries, but also in terms of ensuring that there is enough support for policies and new technologies that would really allow transformational change. The proposal basically perpetuates the current approach, which very broadly subsidizes industry, as Andrei already pointed out. It's really not as targeted as it would need to be if you want to stick with giving out free allocation, free allowances. So, we know from the IPCC we have a very limited carbon budget left, and we are currently heading towards 4 degrees of warming. This means incremental change will not do it. We need transformational change. So handing out free pollution permits weakens the ETS, and at the same time it doesn't facilitate the transformational change. For that, you would actually need bold policies, bold investment strategies for new technologies development and dissemination. So that's kind of missing in the current proposal. And it's of course true that that Europe has lost part of its industrial base over the last decades, and that industry is fearing that this trend will continue, but it's certainly not due to the ETS. And nevertheless, we need to look at how the EU wants to treat its industrial base in the coming decades. So I find it rather unfortunate that there is a lot of misinformation being spread by industry about the risk of carbon leakage. As Andrei already pointed out, the studies that have been done point to the fact that there has not been any carbon leakage. And also, if you look at the future, there's also been a study on that the risk for carbon leakage going forward is rather minimal. So what we rather would like to see is that all permits come to auction, and that the auctioning revenues are then used for the kind of investments that really need to be made to facilitate this transformational change if we really truly want to stay below 2 degrees of warming.
Matthias, if I can come back for a second,
sure.
If I may. Look, it's a matter of price versus cost. And I think that the price needs to be what the price is to be in order to give a long-time price signal that takes us to 2050. I think logically that's how you reach efficiency, and that's what market instruments ought to be if anybody looks at that kind of time horizon in business. But there's a second part, there's a cost, and the reality is that there are some that cannot internalize cost. We've done studies, and these are serious studies that we've done research in energy cost as well as regulatory fitness, the cost of ETS. And it's quite clear there are industries that are seriously impacted. There's no kidding. There are industries for which this is material, even at current prices. And these are especially the electro-intensive industries that are having difficulties because they are, it is 10-12% of the 10 to 15% of the bottom line. That is a serious matter. So I think that we got to be very, very careful that yes, we are putting up a price, and the price is significant and makes a difference, as opposed to just adding to the electricity price of some people in Greece. But at the same time, there has to be a clear recognition that there are some that are in a very open competition, and for whom passing through cost, it's a problem. Now, you look at some of the studies that were put forward in the impact assessment, which questions the pass-through ability of, or kind of imply that many of the industry can't pass through cost. Now, I think that they are very inconclusive, and I think actually the crux of the matter is how well can we define whether people can pass through cost, and I think the jury is still out. I don't have an opinion because I don't have my own study, but there seems to be some industries in which it's better, it's more possible than people say, but there are really also many industries in which it is a reality that they have difficulty passing through cost. So I would caution to kind of throw the baby with the bathwater.
Thanks to both of you. I think what it brings us back to is that there is a fundamental role that the emissions trading system is meant to play, which is it is meant to internalize the external effects of CO2 and related greenhouse gases that are emitted from these sectors, and is meant to help induce a change in the covered plants and entities, and one that will have to be, as Anja said, sort of in the long term, it will have to be transformational. And so I think the fundamental question that to some extent both of you raise is, Anja said it very specifically in a way, is this tool, which is currently only creating potentially a pricing pressure of sorts with some sectors that may not know maybe how to adequately react to this and how to square it with their business strategy. How do we connect that on the one hand with the fact that in the long run we have to really induce significant additional technological change and innovation and a transformation of these sectors to a low carbon economy? And the fundamental question that is asked with regard to the EU ETS is that as a tool able to induce that long-term transformation? And so I want to ask that more fundamental question back to you again, but highlight, of course, that there is an element that's been built into the proposal now as adopted by heads of state and government last year, which is that the NER 300, now called Innovation Fund, is meant to be expanded in size and should also be including the opportunity that innovative projects from industrial sectors are eligible to apply for funding, so that through the back door, basically, by auctioning revenues generated through the system, there is money being refunneled into those sectors, so that should help them create the technological innovation. Do you think that is the right way to go, and is that part of the answer to the question, can the ETS do the transformational change, or is it not sufficient? And I would like to start with Anja.
If the Innovation Fund is, implemented the right way and supports truly innovative projects, then yes, definitely that's a very welcome very welcome fund and can be very helpful. Is it going to be enough to facilitate the transformational change we need? No, of course not. And this is why we need many different policy instruments at the EU level and at national levels that can help facilitate such a transformational change. I mean, the changes we are looking at are extremely large and complex. There is no way that one single policy tool could fulfill could meet all those challenges. So yes, of course, the Innovation Fund is one important tool, and it needs to be complemented by other mechanisms, other tools, other funding mechanisms.
Andrei.
I think the Innovation Fund and the NER 300, I think they're playing very, very important roles. I think one concern that we have is that part of the allocation in these two funds comes from the MSR, and that is kind of putting things into the MSR, and they with one hand and taking them with the other hand. So that we're not at ease with that. On the other hand, realistically, the emission trading, the price signal will drive short-term operational changes, will drive mid-term implementation or deployment, and long-term development. With what we observe, I think it's very credible that the ETS will play the role of the operational driver, fuel switching. It could provide the role for the deployment of renewable and driver of energy efficiency. It's probably a bit more complicated at this stage into the market, because the market is young, and as such people still have not that much confidence in, if you're on the instrument and the price, to drive long-term transformational research, etc., etc. So there is a need, I think, clear need for additional tools. And the Innovation Fund is one thing. The question is very useful. The question is in the middle. The question is in the deployment. Can it play a role? Can the ETS play a role? And I think the ETS can play a role. But for that, two things can happen, or two things should happen. One of them is that the ETS, it should in that case be the instrument, and you don't have it. Do not have 5 different instruments that overlap and create confusion in the price signal, which is what's happening. The second thing is that you have a coordination mechanism that takes care and kind of coordinates and cleans up between the various instruments that are shoulder to shoulder with ETS, which is what the MSR is supposed to do. The problem with the MSR is doing that, but the MSR doesn't have enough muscle. So by the time the MSR does that, it's going to be a long time. So our concern is that yes, short term, yes, long term, probably not. Clearly need something. How do you make it, which is very critical, in the middle, in the medium term, where either you just keep the ETS as a price signal, or you really strengthen the MSR in order to be able to be the coordinating mechanism.
We've spent some time on this topic, but I'd like to go into it once more, because I think it's kind of at the heart of the matter. So you've spoken very specifically of the functions that the ETS can usefully play, or may be able to play, but especially about the midterm, about deployment, and about the long term, the innovation. So if there are such concerns over the ETS being able to play that role in the time frame that we need for these changes to take place, and considering that, Anja, you were also acknowledging that innovation funding may be useful, but that additional measures may be needed. What are your ideas for additional elements that could, together with the ETS, can turn into a package that could ensure with greater certainty that we're able to reach, stage 2, the deployment of existing low-carbon technology, and the third element, the innovation, and have that be done in a way that, especially for the industrial sectors in Europe, is a winning strategy, that they don't seem sort of to be as threatening as the ETS seems to be. And I haven't said whom I'm going to ask this first to.
Sorry, can you repeat that part of the last part of the question, Matthias? Because
yes.
somehow I lost that last sentence, I think. Sorry, apologies for that.
That's probably my mistake in formulating in a very complicated manner. So what I'm wondering is, do you have specific ideas for a package of EU policies that could help support the ETS? Because as you say, you both have some concerns over its ability to do the long-term job. And what are the measures that might also be finding some support from the industrial sectors? Because in the end, it's about major reformation in those sectors in particularly, and representatives from those sectors very often already are voicing very strong concerns over the ETS in its current form. So how do we get them on board for a package that might work? Andrei.
Well, look, there's always a bell curve, and there'll be some that will never get on board. So that's what it is. But if you ask me, I think that if you do want to have this driven by market forces, then first of all, the two things need to happen. One of them is have a credible, not a credible MSR, that's not the right word, but a muscled, well, kind of well endowed MSR. And the second thing is, I think we got to stop doing this policy restructuring of ETS in order for people to actually believe that it's going to be here in this form. Nobody kind of questions whether there's an oil market. Well, quite clearly, there were some people in the last couple of years they're questioning what's going to happen to this. So the more you let the stick price signal, the longer term focus you have. The second part is you do need something akin to the innovation fund. Whether the innovation fund in this current impersonation is the right modalities and procedures, and whether it is the right size, I think it's probably not. But if you want to introduce too much intervention in this, I think that at some point you will then kind of really get into a close loop with the price signal. So I do believe it's necessary. I don't think we should exaggerate it, but I think that we should make clear that this market is here to stay, and that the price will drive change. Again, the price, it initially was really a very short-term price. It is now becoming, I think, after the MSR and with this package, I think it's gaining credibility. But don't forget that this market has been around for 10 years, while you have something like the oil market that's been around over 100 years, and it took a while until it gained credibility. It is a very young price signal.
Thank you. So that's essentially consolidation of the system, and then we tackle the next, the larger revolution thereafter. Anja,
Yeah.
what would be your take?
Well, certainly you have to coordinate policies very well so that they can actually work synergistically, or at least not hamper each other. And the MSR may turn out to be a tool that helps us do that. I would agree with Andrei that it doesn't have enough muscle, that it would need to be stronger for really to do its job. And then the larger question of what kind of policy tools you need, I like this quote, to every complex problem there is a simple solution, and it is always wrong. And that's what we are facing with climate change. It's an incredibly complex problem, and the transformation we are striving for is a very complex one, which will require very deep and significant long-term change. For this, to accomplish this, we will need a lot of different policy tools. We will need, renewable energy targets, renewable energy policies, support policies, the same for energy efficiency. Of course, we also need, a host of policies in all the sectors that are not covered by the EU ETS, which make up actually, the bulk of emissions, about 60% of the emissions. And all these policy tools need to work in sync with each other. And of course, we are never going to get it perfect. we always will have to adjust things, and we will have to, you know, to fine-tune things. But what it all comes down to is the political willingness. Is there political willingness to implement the changes that we need to see in order to facilitate this change? We have learned a lot over the last 10 years. We know what works and what doesn't work. So it really is now, it's up to the politicians and to the member states to, you know, take this opportunity and say, okay, let's get real. Let's really fix this policy tool if we want it to work.
Thank you. The quick summary of that to my mind is tinkering and changing is okay as long as the level of ambition is correct. And the word ambition I'll take as a segue to actually picking up a question that has reached us in different forms. One, in fact, from Frank Watson, managing editor at Platts, and somebody who's been participating and viewing the event. And I'm going to merge that questions because they're related to the EU target, translated into the ETS target, and the Paris conference at the end of the year. So the question voiced in my words is, can you envisage an agreement in Paris that would induce a raising of the EU target that would mean that also the ETS proposal would need to be changed? Andrei.
Well, look, anything is possible. This is politics, but we have INDCs, and we know what they are for the most of the major countries. I think the Brazilians are coming up sometime next week, but for some of the major emitters, we do have them, and the major, you know, negotiating power, so to speak, even though they're all equal negotiators. I frankly have difficulty imagining at this point what can come up with a Paris Agreement that would induce the EU to go back to the drawing board and say we would like to have a raise our target because everybody else is doing this and we can do it. It's not meant to be negative. It's meant to be realistic based on the text that we have had. And I don't, you know, it's quite clear that, you know, there are, we know what they are, we know what they add to, and we know what people propose. And there is no process, to my knowledge, that will allow or that would force anybody to raise their level of ambition. So my sense is that this is what we're going to live with until the next iteration. As such, I'm having some difficulties thinking of any outcome that would force an increase in level of ambition.
And just a quick afterthought: do you think the emissions trading directive, as changed by the proposal, would it already be able to cope with a higher target, or would it need changing? That was
I mean, the emission trading directive, the emission trading directive will do what the emission trading directive will do, in the sense that it will work and will produce a different level of price. That's about but that's what it's meant to do. It's not meant to do really anything else. So yes, it will work. It's just if you raise the level of ambition and you say, you know, it's at least 40%, and you say, well, it's not 40%, it's 50%, then you will have a higher price. The caveat is you could raise the price, but then kind of introduce what, you know, many people don't like it. That is the internationalization of the carbon market, which in the end I think will be a necessity. So I think that it is perfectly able to cope with this. The question really is going to be what is going to happen in the carbon leakage part if indeed you raise this level of ambition, because you know, at some point the pie really shrinks a lot, and some people with an unfocused free allocation will become really hurt.
Thank you. Anja.
It's of course difficult to judge what will happen in Paris, because we already, you know, because I to some extent share Andrei's kind of realistic assessment of the situation. I think that's why it's so important we have shorter commitment periods. That's why you know, the Climate Action Network has been saying we need 5-year commitment periods so that we can raise the targets again if it's not possible to do it earlier than that. So you know, if we don't get an outcome that will enable us to have this conversation now or in the near future, then at least we have to have some kind of mechanism that will enable us to have this discussion before 2030, because that's just too far away.
Thank you. And I think on the technical side, I would say that the proposal or the directive would need to be amended to cope with the higher EU target through the linear reduction factor. And as such, I think that would be relatively easy to do, because it would be a matter of changing essentially a single number. But indeed, the implications may be a different thing. We need to be coming to a close here, and I will just have, I think, one last question to you, which is sort of more the crystal ball gazing nature. You know, we'll sort of open the sweeps on when you think the Commission proposal, or when do you think the proposal for the ETS change is going to be adopted as a final version between Council and European Parliament. They've only just started. The Environment Committee appointed its rapporteur yesterday. The Council is starting discussion. You know, if you could look into the future, what date would your money be on for the finalization of this process? Anja first.
I would be surprised if it was passed before 2017, because in all likelihood it will be discussed together with the effort-sharing decision proposal, which is not going to come out until probably spring, early summer next year. So and probably there will be quite a bit of discussing that countries will have to do to come to an agreement there. So I would say probably 2017.
Thank you. Andrei, your best guess?
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think this is going to be, first of all, you know, whether Paris is going to have a great impact or not going to have a great impact. I mean, we can always be surprised and maybe pleasantly surprised. But that, you know, my suspicion is that really serious discussion are going to start after Paris. Considering the ESD and we actually, whether they will or not, I don't know, but I hope that there's some link between the two, because there are links between the two, and that there's a discussion there that makes sense. I would also say sometime in 2017. So that leaves us then with about a year and a bit or so until the MSR kicks in.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that future-looking perspective. A big thank you to the two of you for making the time, for sharing your insights and your perspective. I very much appreciate that. A big thank you to the viewers that have followed us live, that have provided input, sent us upfront questions. And thanks to all of those of you who are watching a recording and have made it to the very end. Congratulations. We ourselves here at Ecologic Institute are still experimenting to some extent with this format. So please, you know, bear with us as we're trying to tease out sort of remaining issues on the technical side, and we hope to be getting better webinar by webinar. Just so that everybody knows, the topic for the next two iterations, which are going to be in mid-October and mid-November respectively, are going to be first the EU's governance system for 2030. As our topic for October, and in November it will be climate finance, the $100 billion question just before Paris. Thank you very much for your participation and your attention, and much luck to everybody, and we'll be discussing this ETS proposal again, I'm sure, on another occasion. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting us. Bye-bye.